In the quaint town of Silverwood, the old high school stood as a relic of the past, cloaked in ivy and shrouded in rumors. Once a prestigious institution, its walls were now silent witnesses to years of abandonment. Despite the eerie atmosphere, local teenagers often dared each other to explore its forgotten corridors after dark. On a chilly evening in October, 5 high school friends, Alex, Jamie, Casey, Jordan, and Taylor, decided to take on the dare. Equipped with flashlights and a shared thrill for adventure, they pushed open the creaking front doors of the school. The echo of their entrance seemed to stir the sleeping spirits of the building. As they wandered through the dimly lit hallways, their flashlights cast long shadows that danced across the peeling walls. Alex, a natural leader and the most courageous of the group, led the way. They explored classroom after classroom, each room telling a story of decades long gone, desks scattered, textbooks moldy, and chalkboards still scribbled with faded equations. The friends reached the auditorium, where rows of dusty chairs faced a grand stage. Jamie, whose fascination with the paranormal was well known among them, suggested they try a seance. Despite some hesitation, the allure of contacting spirits in such a setting was irresistible. They sat in a circle on the stage, holding hands, and Jamie began to summon any spirits present. The air grew colder, their breaths visible in the flashlight beams. As Jamie called to the spirits, a faint whisper seemed to echo through the auditorium. The words were indistinct, but the very sound made their skin crawl. Suddenly, the flashlights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Panicked, they scrambled for their phones, their only source of light now. As the lights from their phones pierced the darkness, a loud slam echoed through the building. The doors to the auditorium had shut tight. Frantic, the group tried to open the doors, but they wouldn't budge. That's when they heard it, soft, dragging footsteps approaching from the back of the auditorium. Flashing their lights toward the sound, they saw nothing. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped abruptly at the edge of their circle. Terrified but trapped, the friends decided the only way out was to find another exit. They ventured into the backstage area, where old props and costumes were strewn about. The narrow passageways were cluttered, making their progress slow and nerve-wracking. As they navigated through the maze of rooms, they stumbled upon an old projector room with films scattered around. Curious despite the fear, Jordan suggested they see what was on the reels. They set up the old projector, which surprisingly still worked, and began to watch the film. It depicted various school events from years past, but as they watched, the footage began to change. It showed a group very much like theirs, exploring the school. The film became erratic, the images blurry and distorted, and then it showed that group screaming, running from an unseen terror. Suddenly, the projector stopped. The silence that followed was oppressive. Then, the unmistakable sound of the film reel flapping against the projector filled the room, but the images on the screen did not stop. Against all logic, the scenes continued to play, showing the shadowy figure of a man, his features obscured by darkness, chasing the previous group. Horrified, they turned off the projector and decided to leave immediately. As they left the room, they noticed a series of photographs on the wall, dating back to the school's opening. One photo in particular caught Taylor's eye. It was an old black and white image of a teacher standing with his class. His face was scratched out, but the name tag on the desk read, Mr. Holloway. They quickly moved towards the library, hoping to find another exit. As they entered, the door behind them shut, and once again, they heard the dragging footsteps. This time, however, they also heard a deep, raspy voice whispering a name over and over, Holloway. Holloway. Inside the library, the books began to fall from the shelves on their own, and the temperature dropped sharply. They felt a presence among them, more tangible and terrifying than before. Just as they were about to run, a book fell open in front of them. It was an old yearbook, and on a page marked by a folded corner, they saw a picture of Mr. Holloway. His eyes, though in black and white, seemed to pierce through them, filled with malevolence. Realizing they were dealing with something beyond their understanding, they gathered their courage, clutching each other's hands tightly. The musty air of the library thickened as the whispering intensified, echoing through the cavernous room. Holloway. Holloway. It moaned, a sound that seemed to come from the very walls around them. It was a haunting chant that resonated with a deep, sorrowful agony. Casey, the most rational of the group, tried to calm the rising panic. "We need to stay focused," she said, her voice shaking. "Let's find a way out. This has to be some sort of elaborate prank." Despite her words, her eyes betrayed her fear. Ignoring the relentless whispers, they pressed on, weaving through the maze of bookshelves towards the library's rear exit. Every step felt heavy, as if the air itself was trying to hold them back. The dim light from their phones barely pierced the darkness, casting eerie shadows that twisted and writhed along the dusty floor. As they neared the back door, a sudden chill swept through the room. The temperature dropped so drastically that their breath fogged the air. Then, without warning, a stack of books burst from a nearby shelf, scattering across the floor with a thunderous crash. They jumped back, hearts pounding, only to see a dark figure dart between the shelves, its movements quick and jerky. Frozen in terror, they watched as this shadowy figure paused, then slowly turned towards them. Its features were indistinct, but the malice in its posture was unmistakable. Taylor gasped, "It's him, it has to be Holloway." The figure began to move towards them, its steps silent but filled with intent. In a moment of desperation, Jordan threw a book in its direction. The book passed through the figure as if it were nothing but air, and the shadow continued its relentless advance. Alex, always the protector, stepped forward. "Run," he yelled, and the group turned, scrambling towards the other side of the library. They ran through the aisles, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls, the chilling whispers of a Holloway. Holloway. Pursuing them like a curse. They burst through a side door into a narrow hallway that led to the school's old gymnasium. The gym was vast and shadowy, the moonlight streaming through broken windows the only source of light. The expanse seemed endless, and the echoes of their footsteps were swallowed by the dark. Behind them, the door slammed shut with a definitive clang, and the sound of the dragging footsteps resumed, slower now, more deliberate. The group moved deeper into the gym, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of escape. In the center of the gym, the remnants of what once might have been a pep rally lay scattered. Old banners hung from the rafters, and deflated basketballs were strewn across the floor. They paused, catching their breath, the silence oppressive. Suddenly, the banners began to sway as if caught in a strong wind, though no breeze stirred the stagnant air. A low groan echoed through the gym, and the doors at the far end rattled violently. Startled, they watched as one door swung open, then slammed shut with such force that dust billowed around it. The atmosphere thickened with dread, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched crawled over their skin. Whispers filled the air, growing louder, until they were deafening. "Holloway. Holloway. Join us," it seemed to say. Jamie, nearly hysterical, shouted, "What do you want from us?" but only the echoes of her own voice answered back. They backed away from the center of the gym, moving towards the open door, their only apparent escape. As they neared the door, the temperature dropped again, and a dense fog rolled across the floor, enveloping their feet. They stumbled through, coughing and shivering, when suddenly, a loud, harrowing scream tore through the gym. It was a sound of pure terror and despair, a sound that could chill the very soul. They ran, not daring to look back, their breath ragged in their throats. The hallway outside the gym led to the school's science wing, a newer addition that was less familiar to them. The halls here were lined with glass cases filled with scientific achievements and awards. As they passed, the figures in the photos seemed to watch them, their eyes following every move. The science wing was unnervingly quiet compared to the chaos they had left behind. Here, the shadows seemed to press close, as if eager to whisper secrets. They continued to move, driven by a primal urge to escape, to survive. But as they approached the end of the hallway, the lights above flickered violently, casting strobe-like shadows that disoriented them. They halted, disoriented, when a loud bang sounded behind them. Turning, they saw the figure of Holloway once again, this time clearer, closer, more menacing than ever. The apparition stood at the end of the hallway, its outline blurred but unmistakably human. His presence was suffocating, a tangible darkness that seemed to drain the light from the surroundings. The friends were frozen in place, their hearts pounding in their chests. Holloway's figure began to move towards them, slowly, as if every step was measured and purposeful. His movements were unnaturally smooth, gliding over the floor with no sound at all. The air around him seemed to shimmer with a dark aura, and as he moved, the lights flickered more aggressively, as if trying to ward off his presence. The silence was broken by Taylor, whose voice trembled as she whispered, "We need to move, now." Her words snapped the others out of their trance, and they turned, running towards the end of the hallway where a door marked "Emergency Exit" promised a way out. As they approached the door, a sudden intense cold swept through the hallway, so fierce it burned their lungs as they breathed. They pushed through the door, spilling out into the cool night air, the sudden change from oppressive darkness to the open, starlit sky momentarily disorienting them. They found themselves at the back of the school, facing the old athletic fields. The grass was overgrown, and the track was cracked and worn. The night was quiet, the earlier wind that had accompanied their entry into the school now gone as if holding its breath. They paused, catching their breath, looking back at the school. The building loomed ominously, its windows dark and unwelcoming. "We can't keep running," Jordan panted, his face pale under the moonlight. "He'll just keep following us." Jamie, shaking, pulled her jacket tighter around her. "What does he want? Why is he after us?" Alex looked back at the school, his expression grim. "I don't know, but we can't go back in there. Let's circle around to the front and try to make it to the main road. Maybe we can get a signal on our phones and call for help." Nodding in agreement, they began to walk along the edge of the athletic fields, keeping the school to their right. The grass rustled under their feet, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent night. As they walked, the oppressive feeling of being watched returned. They glanced nervously over their shoulders, half expecting to see Holloway's figure emerging from the darkness. They reached the school's front lawn, the old facade of the building casting long shadows across the ground. The main road was in sight, but as they moved towards it, a dense fog began to roll in, thick and white, obscuring their vision and dampening the sounds around them. Within moments, they were enveloped in the fog, the world reduced to the few feet of visibility around them. The fog seemed to isolate them, each sound muffled, each step uncertain. They held hands, afraid to be separated in the impenetrable white. Suddenly, Taylor stopped, her grip tightening on Jamie's hand. "Do you hear that?" she whispered urgently. The others listened, straining their ears. A soft sound filtered through the fog, faint but growing louder. It was the sound of a piano, the notes slow and melancholic, playing a tune that seemed both unfamiliar and hauntingly beautiful. "Where is that coming from?" Casey asked, her voice a mix of fear and wonder. "It sounds like it's coming from the school," Jordan replied, his eyes scanning the foggy landscape. The music continued, a sad melody that tugged at their hearts, compelling yet foreboding. As they stood listening, the temperature dropped sharply, their breath visible in the air mingling with the fog. "We can't stay here," Alex said decisively. "This is exactly what he wants. He's trying to scare us, keep us off balance." Reluctantly, they started moving again, the piano music following them, the notes playing over and over in their minds. They reached the main road, the fog beginning to thin, the silhouette of the town visible in the distance. But as they stepped onto the road, ready to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the school, they realized something was terribly wrong. The town before them wasn't their own. The buildings were old, decrepit, nothing like the quaint shops and homes of Silverwood. The road itself was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and the whole scene was bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. They turned back to look at the school, but it too had changed. No longer a modern relic, it stood as a grandiose, menacing structure, its architecture ancient and foreboding. Confused and terrified, they realized they were trapped in a different time or dimension, the school transformed into a spectral version of itself from what might have been a century ago. The fog that surrounded them seemed to act as a barrier, a curtain between worlds that they had unwittingly passed through. The haunting melody of the piano continued to drift towards them, now mingled with the sound of distant, mournful singing. The friends clung to each other, their minds racing as they tried to understand what had happened. Jamie, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "It's like we're caught in a loop, or a trap. Holloway must be controlling this. But why? What does he want with us?" Taylor's voice cracked under the strain of fear. Alex looked around, trying to make sense of the surreal landscape. I don't know, but we can't just stay here. We have to try to find a way out. Let's keep moving. They walked along the road, the eerie light casting long shadows. The town ahead was silent, the only sounds the soft echo of the piano and their own footsteps. The buildings they passed were old and dilapidated, windows boarded up, doors hanging off hinges, a ghost town forgotten by time. The fog began to lift slightly, revealing more of the strange environment. In the distance, they could see what looked like an old cemetery, its wrought iron gates twisted and overgrown with ivy. The path they were on seemed to lead directly to it. Jordan pointed towards it, his voice unsteady. Maybe we'll find some answers there. Cemeteries have histories. Gravestones. Names. Maybe we can learn something about Holloway. Reluctantly, they agreed, their curiosity mingling with an overwhelming sense of dread. As they approached the cemetery, the singing grew louder, a chorus of voices that seemed to weep and wail with the wind. The gate creaked ominously as they pushed it open, the rusted metal groaning under their touch. Inside, the cemetery was shrouded in mist, the gravestones like sentinels in the fog. They moved through the rows of markers, reading the names and dates, which ranged from the barely legible to the surprisingly recent. It seemed as if time itself was confused here, the past and present melding into one. Suddenly, Casey stopped short. In front of her was a large tombstone, more elaborate than the others. It read, "Here lies Jonathan Holloway. Beloved teacher, condemned to eternity for his sins against time." 1894 to 1922. The inscription sent chills down their spines. Casey turned to the others, her face pale. This has to be it. He was a teacher here, and something happened, something terrible that's keeping him here, and now us. They stood there, absorbing the reality of their situation, when the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air filled with the sound of the earth moving, groaning under some unseen force. The graves around them seemed to shift, the soil churning as if something below was stirring. Terrified, they backed away from Holloway's grave, but the ground continued to shake more violently. Cracks appeared in the soil, spreading out like spider webs. From these fissures, a cold wind emerged, carrying with it whispers of countless voices, all speaking at once, unintelligible and desperate. Overwhelmed by fear, they ran from the cemetery, the ground still rumbling behind them. They didn't stop until they reached the outskirts of the ghost town, their breaths heavy, their bodies trembling. "We can't stay here," Jordan panted. "We need to find another way out. There has to be another way." The town, though desolate and decaying, might hold some clue, some key to escaping this nightmare. They decided to explore the town, searching for any sign or symbol that might explain how to break Holloway's curse. As they walked the empty streets, they noticed that despite the decay, there seemed to be a pattern to the madness around them. Certain symbols were repeated on the buildings, clocks, all stopped at the same time, 3:07. Pocket watches engraved in the stonework. Time was a recurring theme, omnipresent in its stillness. "It's all connected to time," Jamie murmured, realization dawning. Holloway's grave mentioned sins against time. This isn't just about us or him, it's about time itself. Maybe he tried to change something he shouldn't have, and this is the consequence. They continued deeper into the town, each step taking them further into the mystery of Holloway and the eerie world they were now part of. As they rounded a corner, they came upon an old library, its doors slightly ajar. The building looked as if it hadn't been touched by the decay that affected the rest of the town. It stood solemn and inviting, almost as if it were waiting for them. With a shared look of determination mixed with apprehension, they pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The library was vast, the shelves laden with books that appeared untouched by time or decay. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. The silence in the library was profound, broken only by their soft footsteps as they wandered through the aisles. Each section they passed seemed to focus on different aspects of history and science, but it was the section on temporal studies that caught their attention. Here, the books spoke of time travel, parallel dimensions, and the manipulation of time streams, concepts that seemed fantastical yet eerily relevant to their situation. As they delved deeper, Taylor pulled a thick, leather-bound book from a shelf. The title read, The Ethics of Time, Cautionary Tales of Temporal Meddling. Flipping it open, she found a chapter that mentioned a device called the chronolock, an artifact designed to control and manipulate time. According to the text, misuse of such a device could result in catastrophic anomalies, trapping individuals or even entire towns in warped pockets of time and space. This must be what Holloway was involved with, Alex said, piecing together the information. He must have tried to use this chronolock and it backfired, trapping his spirit and now us in this loop. Determined to find the chronolock and hoping it could be the key to their escape, they searched the library for any clue to its whereabouts. Hours passed as they pored over texts and maps, until Jamie, digging through a lower shelf, found an old journal, a diary belonging to Jonathan Holloway himself. The journal was filled with entries that detailed Holloway's experiments with the chronolock, his obsession with bending the laws of time, and his increasing paranoia that others were seeking to steal his discoveries. The final entry was frantic, mentioning a hidden chamber beneath the school where he kept the chronolock, guarded by mechanisms only he understood. With a new lead, they left the library as the sky began to darken, clouds rolling in to shroud the moon. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and an uneasy wind picked up, swirling the leaves around their feet as they made their way back to the school. The school loomed ominously against the night sky, its windows dark and foreboding. They entered through the broken front doors, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they made their way to the basement, guided by Holloway's journal. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and science equipment. After searching for nearly an hour, they found a concealed door behind a false wall. The door was locked, but Jordan, recalling the journal's hints, manipulated several old clocks set into the wall until they all read 3:07, the time frozen throughout the town. With a click, the door swung open, revealing a small, dusty room. There, on a pedestal, was the chronolock, a complex device of gears and crystal, humming with an eerie energy. As they approached, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder now, a chorus of voices begging them to leave the chronolock untouched. But it was too late for hesitation. Alex reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the device. The moment he did, a blinding light filled the room, and the ground shook violently. The last thing they heard was the echo of Holloway's voice, filled with regret and sorrow, warning them of the irreversible nature of time. Then, everything went black. When they awoke, they were outside, lying on the grass of the school's front lawn. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the town of Silverwood, which looked just as they remembered it. Confused but relieved, they stood, looking at the school, now just a harmless old building. Had they escaped the loop, or had they changed something fundamental in their own timeline? They couldn't be sure. All they knew was that the horrors of the night had ended, but the shadows of Holloway's sins against time would linger, haunting their memories forever. As they walked away from the school, a cold breeze whispered through the leaves, a subtle reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed.